Above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And I guess in some ways we all learn from others, passing the lineage down to us, and obviously it predates in some ways modern recorded history as well. But rhythm has become a healing force in my life. And a lot of drummers are responsible. They're kind of the leaders of the band. And get a chance to talk to a guy today who's done that. Prolific writer, Charlie Suhor. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Glad to be here, Jake. Thank you.
Did you ever, how quickly were you able to connect with Ed Blackwell and James Black in New Orleans?
Well, Ed Blackwell was playing in a little dive in a quarter with Nat Perlat, bassist, and Ed Franco on piano after hours.
Wow.
And I'd heard of him because my idol at the time was Earl Palmer, who was playing in a little lounge on Canal Street, the Texas Lounge. But when I was talking to some friends of Earl's, I said, man, Earl Palmer's got to be the best modern jazz drummer in New Orleans. The guy shook their head and said, oh, that Blackwell. So when I heard Blackwell, it just blew my mind. He was doing very original things, things that not even Max Roach was doing at the time. So that was that, and I followed him. Then there were concerts with Blackwell and the Modern Jazz Quartet, the American Jazz Quintet, I should say, at black venues. And in those days, whites could go to the black venues, but they weren't welcome in ours by the law. But we went to Bill Huntington, and I would go to hear Blackwell and the American Jazz Quintet with Alice Marcellus and Chuck Beatty on bass, and just a great black players, wonderful. Yeah.
Is there a way for you to articulate Roach's the different? I mean, because they were both totally, individualists in their playing. I mean, it's all relative. But what was Blackwell doing? What rhythms was he adding or layering that Roach was not?
Well, he had a sound similar to Roach's because they both tuned their toms and thirds. But he used to have a distinctive style. Sometimes he would play on the simple straight quarter notes, not the boom, chichi, boom, which everybody played. And you think that would be flat, but it was such a pure sound. So this is the essence of jazz, man. And he would also play very African-style solos on the drums. And it was just aesthetically wonderful, terrific. In fact, he was so much into jazz that some of the cats who were doing early rhythm and blues rock and roll wouldn't use him because he'd get too interesting. He wouldn't just keep the backbeat going. But he was fascinating. I mean, just a wonderful, wonderful player.
Why do you account for the elasticity of the rhythms? I mean, like, there was no such thing as rock and roll. Guys like Charlie Neville, Sonny Rollins, Train, they walked the bar. They did R&B. That kind of R&B was coming up. But I'm trying to figure out, like, from the drumming perspective, why individuality was prescient, and then the elasticity in the rhythm. I mean, people stopped. It was just a very free time, and I think it had a lot to do with social consciousness.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, it was odd because in those days, a lot of the modern jazz drummers were playing with the rhythm and blues bands to make money. Earl Palmer had a book that he wrote in which he talked about, it was so great after playing, a rock band, a rhythm and blues band, to come and play freely at night. And they weren't even playing at night sometimes. They were relentless. They'd have jam sessions at each other's houses, and the white cats and the black cats would be doing after-hour sessions in the quarter or in different parts of town. There was no market for it, literally. There were very few people who were hip to it. those who would go to the Texas Lounge near Earl Palmer, or go to rare concerts where there'd be black music, or they'd find, if they were really relentless, they would find the after-hour sessions. And you had guys like Mouse Bonatti and my brother Don Suhor and Mike Surpass and things like that. So you had a hunt for modern jazz, and when you did, you felt like part of a cognoscenti, because this was like, the early 1950s, and modern jazz was not on the radar in New Orleans at all. In fact, jazz was barely on the radar. That came about with the revival of the late 40s and early 50s, traditional jazz revival. But it was, it was, some guys played both modern and rhythm and blues.
Is it fair here? Charlie, it's such an honor to talk to you, man. But there was a poster that Charles Neville, rest in peace, sent me that said, like, in 1950s, to white America, if you don't let your kids listen to that devil music, meaning black children, and I just wonder, within that divide, did the mafia support the live music? I'm trying to figure out if there was that much cultural bias down there. How did you fly below the radar? Was it? I mean, John Hendricks told me if it wasn't for the Sicilians, there'd be no jazz in America.
Well, there was, the Sicilians and the Italians played the greatest part in early jazz with Nick LaRocca and the early Dixieland bands, early traditional bands, which was white culture sometimes intermingling with black. But this was New Orleans, so New Orleans was a different place, as it still is, so that police didn't bother you if you weren't being too visible with your integration. So now sometimes it got bad, like a white trumpeter Mike Surpass got beat up after sitting in with the black band.
He did.
And Benny Clement, this was recently in the Jazz Archivist. Benny Clement and Earl Palmer used to jam at each other's houses at Benny's house in the corner. They got raided. Earl Palmer was there, and they would pull them in and release them after a short time. But it was not that. It was not. It was against the law to have integrated bands.
Exactly. That's exactly. It was very, very segregated. So I'm trying to figure out how people skated. I mean, I guess I just, it's a different. It was essentially a black subculture, and it was totally hip for everybody, whatever the skin color was, to play it. But I just wonder how you thrived in that scene at that time. I mean, and did you actually go on the Chitlin circuit? I mean, Tampa, I have all these names written down that Charlie told me about, and different, the Chitlin circuit. I mean, did you taste the Chitlin circuit?
No, I was living in New Orleans and just hanging out around town and hunting down good jazz when I could find it, black and white. But the black community was not that impenetrable. It was a double standard, really. The way, basically, you went at your own risk. But let's put it this way: the risk was not very great. A good example: when I was a junior at Loyola, 1950 this was, I put together a band for an interracial talent show that was held at Jesuit Auditorium. It was a high school interracial talent show, and I had three guys from Xavier, and me and the rest of the rhythm section from Loyola. And now that was illegal, but it was publicized in advance. But tell you what, the police did not want to mess with raiding the Jesuit Auditorium in a Catholic city where the Archbishop was really powerful. So we just went there and played the gig, and we played during the intermission while the judges were judging. So that happened quite a bit. I mean, the police went after the powerless and sometimes the blatant. But I mean, there were bands in the quarter, Dixieland bands playing on the stage together. Sidney Villa had a club on Bourbon Street, and he had a black band, Freddie Colvin's band. He'd be playing on the bandstand with them all the time. So New Orleans was kind of a third world place in that sense. You could push the envelope and get smacked, but not often.
Interesting. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this voice in for you. I don't expect you to know who it is, but I do want you to pay attention to the content, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
There was a period in the old recordings where bass drums weren't very present in the music. It was always mostly top end of the drum kit.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really. It wasn't until probably the 70s when bass drums got kind of got into the mix, or when they started remastering some of those old sessions, and the drum kit got to be a little bit more full or something like that. But as a kid, I kind of remember hearing the top end of the drums more than I heard the bottom end of them. So I really can't say. I think I got the idea of being close related to the kick drum and leaving the snare drum alone through my session work I did with Alan Toussaint. It was just a strict rule that you don't put a note where the snare drum is. Yeah, that's the backbeat. The backbeat is the snare drum. The snare drum is hit on 2 and 4. That's the backbeat.
I see. Okay, I'm a non-music.
Want to take a guess at who that is?
It's a definite New Orleans dialect, but no, I don't know who it was.
Yeah, that was my interview from July 2015 with George Porter Jr.
Yeah.
No,
that name, sure.
Yeah, well, he was part of the Meters, and
oh yeah,
he was
I thought that the Meters drummer was a guy with a great nickname.
No, it was Zigaboo, and this is.
Oh, yeah.
But his rhythm partner was George Porter, and I wanted you to talk about, because your ears, you guys were autodidacts. I mean, there was no rewind buttons. You weren't able to replay stuff over and over again. You learned by ear before you learned by sight, and the point is that it allowed your ears were open, wide open, and the bass drum was not that prevalent in the music. And I wonder how I'd like your approach to music, even in a rock setting, in order to add inflection and counterpoint and feathering the drum in all genres. Go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I've got to go back to the fact that in the early days, the bass drum either played like on the march, on downbeat, offbeat, or it played 4/4. And of course, the early recordings couldn't use bass drums because it would knock the needle off the recorder.
Exactly.
So the bass drum, though, long before the 70s, was becoming heard in jazz. I mean, Max Roach was playing really intricate stuff on the bass drum in the 50s. His music with Clifford Brown now was known for that. And now in rock and roll, the bass drum started to take on a different rhythm and blues, or a different role. But that was, I think, in my memory, that was around the beat before the downbeat, and the downbeat on one became for ballads, and then the offbeat for shuffle rhythm, like for upbeat things. So now my own growth was, I started out with early jazz, Dixieland and traditional,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was playing swing in Loyola with a big band. But I took lessons my last year in high school with Lou Dillon, who also taught Reed Vaughn, wonderful New Orleans drummer. And Lou Dillon was one of the first drummers to do left-hand independence with foot independence. And there was a book that was classic, Jim Chapin's Coordinated Independence for the Modern Drummer. And it was a monster. And
four-way coordination. Yeah, no, I mean, how did you learn to let the body dance, Charlie? I mean, this is the point, is that, I mean, everything that you hear has a tribal quality to it. You recognize the only way to play spiritual music is when you can get into the zone. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you cultivated that. What was the band that you were in that you can say went to the zone, the most?
Well, frankly, I always tried to get into the soul of the music. It was not that difficult with early jazz because I had drummers like my idols were Baby Dodds, George Wedling, Ray Baduke, and those were the early drummers, and they played with a lot of color. Baby played the woodblock, snare drum, tom-toms. Baduke was also good with that kind of sonic drumming. And I think the sonic tradition was then carried on in the swing era, and then I guess Kenny Clark and Max Roach brought it to the left-hand and foot independence. So even with the early jazz, I mean, I tried to get high and into the music, and I had a ball doing it. So I don't think that I don't think of it as tribal. I think of it as spiritual, and the spiritual aspect can inform tribalism, and it can inform modern jazz, and it can even inform classical music.
Can you break? How does it inform tribal music?
Well, I was studying African drumming for a long time, and I had records of African tribal drumming, and I heard African ensembles in Chicago when I was living in Illinois, and really, a lot of the beats in the African drumming sound like modern jazz tom-toms, or vice versa, I should say, because the modern jazz solos had some of the coloration and complexity of the tribal drums. So that I think that there was a quote that I think Pee Wee Russell made in Nat Hentoff's book, "Hear Me Talking to You." He said there's a certain thing that most cats who play well have. He said they find a way to swing inside the music. You find it in a good classical performance. You find it in a good jazz performance, and I think that's true. I mean, I can get thrills from hearing Bach played well on the piano, and I think that the essence of the music is spiritual messaging, and the style is just a matter of how a particular artist makes use of the spirit in his or her playing. Is that making any sense?
Oh, I mean, I just would like you to talk about like how you incorporated the bass drum and Dixieland music vis-a-vis swing, vis-a-vis bebop.
Well, it was pretty set in Dixieland and in swing. In fact, swing.
But I mean, don't you have to put your own accent on it in order to swing those musics?
Well, in swing, it started off phrasing with the brass,
right.
And I tried to make a study of that once, and I found that around the maybe the late 30s, early 40s, drummers started phrasing with the brass, kicking with the brass, they call it. And so, yeah, that was a very use of the bass drum. But the essence of it, you can kick with the brass and still not be swinging. It can become a mechanical electric. Modern jazz, that was a whole new world because they had so many more tools and so many more technical nuances to master, and that was fascinating to me. I just love that, and I lost my chops long ago. But when I was playing in the 50s, I was playing state-of-the-art modern jazz, and it was a joy. I was playing with Bill Huntington, Buddy Prima, in the Army with good cats, and that's just a joy. And what can I say?
You've had it all, and this is something that fascinated me because Charlie's also a decorated writer, and it's an honor to be able to hang with him here. And he wrote a book, Jazz in New Orleans, the Post-War Years Through 1970 Studies in Jazz. And this third section, really, I'd like you, it's so interesting the way you worded it. Section 3 is called An Invisible Generation. It will help dispel the stubborn myth that almost no one was playing bebop or other modern jazz styles in New Orleans before the current generation of young artists appeared in the 1980s. So my question for you is this. Who was playing, what was the freest music going on in the late 60s, early 70s that you were a part of? That is the greatest period of modern music in this country. And what was the Invisible Generation doing? What was the freest music you were playing at that time?
Well, I guess I have to say that in New Orleans, the freest music was being played at least a decade before then, in the early 50s, by
late 50s or early 50s?
Well, let's see. I'm thinking when I was in college, that was the early 50s. Yeah, I mean,
wow,
during World War
early
II,
50s, early 50s.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
During World War II, some really good players would come down and play in strip clubs because the strip clubs would allow you to play modern jazz. So the guitarist Jim Hall was down here playing in a strip joint. And
no way.
Yeah,
oh,
right,
man,
right.
That's great.
Some really good modernists went down here because that's where they could be free. Now, when you're in a strip club, you've got to play for the bumps and grinds, and it was harder on the drummer than anybody. But my brother led the strip band at the Suhor for many years in the 60s, and he had all beboppers in his band, and they would play, they would play Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie charts for the strippers, and then they would play ballads like, I'm thinking Stella by Starlight,
wow,
in a sultry style, and the drummer would kick.
Well, I mean, the dancers would tell them what they wanted them to play.
It wasn't that rigid. I mean, very few of the dancers knew what they were doing.
Bebop was danceable music, Charlie. It's unbelievable.
Right.
I mean, it was like fine. I mean, the way I look at it is like, I'm just trying to burrow down a little bit in the Suhor, canon, because in the early '60s, the advent of the conversational trio, Moshian, Evans, LaFaro, Claire Fisher, Peacock, Gene Stone, this was revelatory. But New Orleans, here's the point. Has New Orleans always been the center of cutting-edge jazz, or was there this exodus to New York that somehow New York jazz was the cutting edge? Because I recognize that, a lot of the Titans or the people that learned from the original masters, like Louis Armstrong, they lived in New York. But yet the more that you talk about New Orleans, and the more I visited there 3 times in the last year, and it's just it's been very exhilarating, obviously connecting with Johnny in a very spiritual way, and just all the brothers down there. And so I wonder, it's not really, there's no real right answer or wrong answer, but has New Orleans, do you believe the Invisible Generation in New Orleans increased musical vocabulary, or was New York the place where jazz really grew?
Well, I don't want to pretend that New Orleans was the home of bebop, but everybody had recordings and radios and listened to Bird and Max and players like that, and they were quick to pick it up and develop it in their own way. So I think you had a few variants pretty much in on that also. So anyway, there were a few people, Fred Crane, another one, the piano player, but most of them were following in the exciting tradition. They were really through by bebop, and they were quickly got on the cutting edge and gave it their own hint. But I don't think that you can say that the innovation happened in New Orleans, except that certain artists were able to push the envelope on their instruments, kind of thing. Am I making sense?
No, you're doing a fantastic job. No, I mean, did you ever collaborate with, Irvin Bannister or Eddie Bowe? Did you cross over into the black music, playing outside of the jazz? I mean, I hate that word. Were there labels being thrown around a lot, or were you guys coming from the Duke Ellington School of Music? It's all music, and then the subjective part is either it's good or bad.
Well, that's hard to answer because I was not into early rock and roll, rhythm and blues, I should say. It was called race music, in fact, in the 50s.
Fats Domino, you weren't into that stuff? I'm just, yeah, that's fine.
Downbeat called it race music and, reviewed the records. When I was in high school, rhythm and blues became commercially popular with a few things like, Lordy Miss Claudie by Lloyd Price.
Right.
And things like that.
Right.
And some Orleanians followed that tradition, like Dr. John Mac Rebenack took that in and just blended it in his own way. But I don't know if I'm just... No, I think that the blacks did not take as big a distinction as the whites did between the rhythm and blues and the jazz. They played it differently, but they valued both much more than the white musicians did.
Why do you think
funny,
that?
But that's the way I felt about it anyway.
Why do you feel that way?
Well, because that's a description of how we of our aesthetic at that time. We thought that jazz was much more interesting to play, and we saw guys in the black community playing with both styles, and we assumed that they were doing the R&B for money, and a lot of them were, but they genuinely enjoyed and obviously cultivated and developed the music rhythmically and in other ways. I mean, Zigaboo, the drummer, is a wonderful artist, and the stuff he was playing with the meters just wasn't around with the beginning of rhythm and blues. At the beginning, it was the backbeat and triplets on the cymbal, things like that. So,
well, I just wonder if the second line had really cultivated when Earl Palmer. I mean, Earl Palmer learned from somebody. Everybody learns from somebody else.
Yeah.
Earl
Palmer, I don't know who he learned from, but he.
You can't be expected. You can't be expected
in the black community because it was just a breakthrough. I mean, kind of like in the Baroque era, you had great Baroque music, then you had Bach, woo,
Right.
And in black jazz, you had great swing, then you had Bird, Diz, and Max, and it was just a breakthrough. And guys in New Orleans heard them. And I guess I could say that the rhythm and blues was more indigenous to New Orleans, to address your point, more than modern jazz was. But they made it their own, and it was part of their culture. So they advanced it. And then the white guys were playing it very well too. Mike Fairpass, Reed Vaughn. There are a lot of good white moderns as well.
I mean, I have another voice to play for you, okay? I don't expect you to know who it is, but again, pay attention to the content and we'll come back.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would read in books about how Kenny Clark was the first drummer to quit playing four on the floor and to use it as like he would his left hand to play non-repetitive comping figures. And I say, okay, I'm going to check that out. I could never really figure out what he was doing until I met Ed Thigpen, who was a great jazz drummer. And Ed and I became good friends. I'm very, very honored by that. And he had seen Kenny Clark live, and and one day we were talking, and he said, I don't know how it came up. He says, one thing that really, really makes me angry. I said, what's that? He says, these guys who write these jazz history books and come out with these ridiculous statements. And he says, the one that kills me is that Kenny Clark revolutionized jazz drumming because he quit playing the bass drum on all four beats. And Ed said, that is absolutely false. He said he played soft four on the floor and accented within that. Same way Max Roach did, same way Blakey did. So there was a great misconception that all of a sudden everybody thought, oh, wow, man, everybody's done with four on the floor. I got some recordings of Tony Williams with Miles, where if you've got a good amplifier and can switch channels on it, you can hear him playing soft four on the bass drum. I've heard Elvin play soft four on the bass drum. So, I mean, that is the kind of BS that distracts people from really listening to and thinking deeply about the music. It's a stereotypical judgment which has absolutely no background or basis historically.
Okay, that was a drummer named Ed Soph. Okay, and I want to ask you, before you comment on that, are there other things that you'd like to set the record straight about things that was profound to me about Klug?
Yeah.
Is that and what is something else? What is another myth in your mind that needs to be dispelled? Because this is a people's history of music, Charlie, and if you got stuff to talk about, floor is yours.
Yeah. You're a drummer, right?
No, I'm just a cultural historian.
Okay. Yeah, you're asking very good drummer questions. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to see live that many drummers outside of New Orleans, and I didn't really ask whether Four on the Floor was abandoned because it wasn't in New Orleans. So it was. I guess you get all kinds of drummers who do all kinds of different things, and you can't really hear a soft Four on the Floor. Interspersed with accents. Of course, I'm listening to the drummer closely, and I'm interested in the relationship between the flowing four, whether the drummer's playing it or not, and the drummer's accents and bop licks, things like that,
right.
Or licks with the brass.
Right.
So I guess I don't have a comment on that. That's knowledgeable, because I just didn't hear that many drummers outside of New Orleans. And when I heard them, it was mostly in context that, drummers were playing traditionally in a swing band or something like that.
Was there an angel that came along and helped you get all this content that you accumulated about these books? How did you find your publisher? I just found mine last year, and it's sort of taking off into interesting directions. But you're a decorated author. I mean, your books are high dollar books. Hardcover of Jazz New Orleans, $65.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive. So I mean, was there divine intervention for Charlie Suhor on this?
I backed into almost everything. Good
Beautiful, man.
I was ambitious, but I had no plan. I backed into playing drums because my brother wanted me to accompany him. I backed into writing for Downbeat because a friend of my brother's moved to Chicago, Gilbert Erskine, and was doing reviews. And I wrote to him saying, I'd like to write an article about modern jazz in New Orleans in 1959. And then the editor of Downbeat was Don DeMichael. Then it was Dan Morgenstern. So they liked my stuff. And Dan Morgenstern became the chief editor of the Jazz Studies series that my book was in. So, I kind of lucked into things with effort and passion. And I think that, the things come together, synchronicity, so that that's, I think it's luck, pluck, and guts and synchronicity, whatever. I can't tell you what it was because I didn't plan it that way. You see what I'm saying?
That's the most beautiful thing, man. The best stuff in life is never planned. Can you just talk a little bit about when you acquired when you took Johnny Vidacovich under your wing, and if you could, talk about what makes Johnny a special person.
Yep. I'd be glad to. I started teaching privately at Campo's Music Store in the early 1960s.
How do you spell that?
Campo, CAMPO''S. It's on Broad Street in New Orleans. And I was a school teacher with a big family, so I needed the dough. I lost my good jazz chops at the time, but I understood them and I knew how to teach it. So that I had a lot of high school drummers, and I would teach them basic reading first, and then when they could read, I would bring records in, and they would play with the records. And I even taught them how to kick with the brass while writing out the kick parts on the records, things like that. And Johnny must have been about 13 or 14 when I met him, and he wasn't the quickest study, but man, when he laid it down, perfect timing. I think the first time I realized this on the set was I just moved him onto the set after doing reading, and we had a crappy old set. I mean, in the studio, Mr. Campo let us use an old set, and I just never could get a sound out of it. But hey, it's a teaching set, you know. So Johnny gets down and sits down at the set. He taps the cymbal, doesn't like the sound apparently, so moves his wrist around a little bit and taps it and gets a pure sound. He hits the snare drum and it kind of echoes weird, and so he hits another part of the snare drum. So he had a natural sense of the tonal possibilities of drumming, which is of course exactly what Baby Dodge had and Max Roach and some of the best players. So I knew that he was a special player even when he first started playing the drums for me. He was playing at home, by the way, and playing with a teenage band. But he had a very delicate, pure touch, and I knew that was the touch of a jazz player. So I took him through lots of good stuff, and I got him. He got into high school with an excellent big band, and then he went to Loyola and was a great drummer in the Loyola big band. And we kept up over the years. I guess he was studying with me for 4 or 5 years, something like that.
Well, did he come to you for the African drumming?
The what?
You said you studied African drumming, and Johnny played a lot.
No, that was later. I just took that up as a side.
What was some other stuff that he came to you seeking? Maybe, was it more mental toughness? Was it more like was it actual stuff you could? It doesn't sound to me. I mean, if he's able to like pinpoint the sound on the hi-hat or the snare drum to get the right tonal sound, that you can't teach that, you know. So
no, I wasn't. Obviously, I couldn't. I was surprised that he'd get a better sound out of those damn drums than I could. And kind of imitated his relaxation. He's a very relaxed player. So you know, and when I heard him over the years, he always had a tonal approach to the drums and the cymbals and everything. He looked at the drums as an ensemble of sounds, and that was exactly what happened when I first put him on the set. But he just got a knack that nobody could teach him. Sometimes teachers say, I taught him all I knew, all he knew. I said, I taught Johnny all I knew, you know. And then he took it from there, and he became a brilliant modern jazz player.
To this day.
Oh, yes. I saw him about 2 years ago at the little club on Oak Street.
You know, it's so, you know, as you, you know, can you talk about a time in your life that you were fighting it, you know, it could have been on the bandstand or anything, and you know, ultimately how you overcame it and how it made you a stronger player in person.
Yeah, I guess the turning point. Well, first of all, I had years and years of yeoman's work in my front room because Don played clarinet and sax, and he explained more about jazz to me than I could have learned anywhere. I mean, he talked about the history of jazz. He talked about how the clarinet evolved. And he was a natural like Johnny, but with a sense of history and a sense of evolution of the music. And he didn't sit me down and teach me that. We listened to the music on 78s, and we'd talk. We bought some Charlie Parker records, and that's when I started trying to play outside of the Dixieland groove and into a modern groove. Of course, my sister and brother, our oldest ones, were from the swing era, and they had lots of swing era records. And we would sit on the porch or on the rocking chair, and on the swing, and listen to swing records when I was a little kid. So music came into the pores, and I was just playing with Don for a long time. And the more he got different records, the more I tried to play with him. He took challenges like there's a Benny Goodman record of The World Is Waiting for the Sunrise. at a really fast clip.
Wow.
And Don would play along with that, and I would be playing along with it too. So challenges came a lot through the stuff he did, and understandings came a lot through stuff he did. So I just owed so much to Don. In fact, only 2 years ago, I put together a CD of his best work, and it was on Jazzology Records. So that I wanted to give him a tribute belatedly. He's been dead now for many years, but he played Dixieland style on clarinet that he adapted to bop, and I called it Bopsyland. Beautifully inventive and different, but he didn't much care about getting famous. He just wanted to get on the job and play his ass off, you know.
Just play your ass off. That's it. Go in, contribute to the music, be part of the conversation. Before I let you go, Charlie, I just wanted to ask you what your concept of love is and how you bring love to the world.
Shoot, well, that's a big one. I don't know. I think my idea is partly rooted in Buddhism. It's that finding a spontaneous way of interacting with your experience rather than overly calculated. I was so cognitive when I was a young man and a kid, and jazz rescued me from that, and having a family rescued me from that. You can't be a stuffed shirt with an adorable child, you know. You can't be a stuffed shirt when you're blowing jazz. So that kind of got me past the intellectualizing everything. I still overthink stuff, but now when I'm overthinking it, I'm relating to the overthinking in a spontaneous way. I think spontaneity in relationships might be my idea of loving myself in the world.
Charlie Suhor, man, that was such a ball, man. I bless you, man, and thank you for all you've done, and we'll be in touch, and I mean, you never lost your chops, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I'm not playing anymore. So, when I was 72, I was playing with a retro big band here, and I just got to where it was hard to move the damn drums. So I'm 84 now, so I don't play, but I'm still attuned to the world, its music, and its good stuff.
And the vibrations. Yeah, no, it's about making the rhythm round and not quantized. It's a dangerous time. We're turning into droids now, Charlie. Yeah, love always, man. Let's stay in touch, brother.
Thank you, man. You did a great job of sticking some questions to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Good hang, man. Take it easy.
Yeah, you too.
All right, later. Bye. That's a blessing. Johnny Vidacovich, bless you, brother. We'll be back with Robin McMillan after this.